welcome to Pitchin Tents Podcast, episode 7 with your host, Bryan Bolt.
And Davis West. What's going on, guys?
We're doing good. How about yourself, Davis?
Good. Hope everybody had a good 4th.
We are very good. Had a great 4th, kind of getting back in the swing of it now. We are, again, like I said, this is episode 7. We've done 6 so far. So today we want to kind of do this. Today's going to be a first in a 2-part series.
Yep.
On anchoring.
Yep.
As we said some time back when we first started this podcast, what we wanted to be primary is educational.
100%.
It'd be great for it to be entertaining, but we are our core, our basis is going to be in education. So with that said, we are going to get in down and dirty today on anchoring, part 1 of a 2-part. And we have a special guest with us today, none other than Kevin Gern with ARA. How you doing, Kevin?
Hey, great on my end. Thank you guys for having me on the show. Looking forward to the discussion today around, of course, education, safety, and one thing I'll go back to the comment you just made there, Bryan. You'd love it to be entertaining, right? But at the end of the day, you need it to be educational. One of the things I've found in my past is if you can keep it slightly entertaining, people learn without even realizing they're learning. So
that's exactly right. People don't mind laughing at us. Just
we get that
on visuals.
With the counts on how many times we say that's right or whatever else it is.
Plenty of different things people found to comment on for sure. Kevin, give us a little bit of bio on yourself before we dive in. Tell everybody who you are, background, little bio, and then, as I said before, Kevin's with ARA, so I want to hear some about your capacity with ARA as well.
Sure, absolutely. So I did come from the rental industry. I will say right out of college, I worked for Cummins Power Systems, Cummins Power Generation and Cummins Engines. Spent a short time in pharmaceutical biotech and then ended up at a rental company. Spent about 10 years there doing sales management and then also jumped into safety role there just because I did an accident investigation and did too good of a job on it, I guess. My background prior to that has been emergency services in one form or another. Mostly fire service related, some EMS and some Homeland Security training stuff. I've done a plethora of education around that stuff since I've been at ARA. I came to ARA in 2019 when an opportunity opened up for me. It was a way for me to, help the entire rental industry instead of just one rental company. And that really appealed to me. Stepping into ARA in 2019, it's been a quick progression through, different positions and different titles. Really enjoyed my stint as the Vice President of Education and Risk Management. And about June of last year, so about a year now, I stepped into a government affairs role. And actually, my title just changed again this week. Basically, I'm taking care of government affairs top to bottom. So I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and the lobbyist for ARA when it comes to federal and state issues.
That's great. You've got a well-known predecessor that retired just a few months ago, I guess, right? Mr. John McClellan.
Yeah, you got it. Johnny Mac,
yep.
John McClellan. And I tell you what, even though he's retired, him and I still go back and forth on the text messages and the phone calls, and we just pester each other up one side and down the other. And I wouldn't have it any other way. He is a great individual to know, great friend, and really miss working with that guy.
It's funny John McClellan story. I hope John gets to hear this. I'm sure he will now, but he and I like to go back and forth between the Georgia Bulldogs and Clemson Tigers. And I went to Clemson, he went to Georgia. So I tell him he needs to introduce a little more orange in his wardrobe.
That's right. Go Tigers.
All right. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about today's topic. And that's specifically anchoring in general. And anchoring is typically divided into loosely defined. We're either going to anchor with stakes or some sort of device that's going to penetrate the soil, or we're going to do it on top of the ground in a ballast, which is a really big topic right now. I'll go ahead and kind of clue everybody into the second part of this topic. In anchoring is specifically going to be geared toward ballasting, which we are not going to spend a lot of time in today. We're going to talk about some other things, and Kevin's got some things he can share too. Specifically on the anchoring side, we'll get into that a little bit later. Any other thoughts, Davis, before we get in?
No, Kev, can you just tell us what ARA is for those out there that are listening that might not know what the ARA stands for or what the organization does, or even the resources, like we're going to get into, the resources that this organization has at hand for its members?
Yeah, absolutely, Davis. ARA, the American Rental Association, we help rental companies primarily in North America with anything that they have to deal with day in and day out. And I'll tell you that one of the things coming from rental, I was in equipment rental for 10 years, and coming to ARA and actually working at ARA, getting behind that curtain, you start to realize how many resources ARA actually has for a rental company. And it begins to blow your mind. And it to the extent that, you start questioning, man, what was I doing? I didn't realize ARA had all of these resources. They've already gone down that rabbit hole. They've already figured out what's needed. And all we got to do is pick up the phone or click the website and it's there at our fingertips. We're a nonprofit association here to support and help the rental industry. And we cover things like education, safety training. Of course, I just spoke to government affairs and how we look out for the best interests of our members and our associate members, which are manufacturers and suppliers. And we're literally here to help in any capacity that any rental company, day-to-day operations, et cetera, has questions about or needs, to include rental contract language and legal counsel and help there, even HR guidance. So you name it, we're there to help, and we're here to serve our members.
I have always said that ARA is an incredible, it's the definition in my mind of what an association should be. An association should have its members back at all costs.
100%.
And I've been lucky enough to serve in multiple capacities with ARA, as well as 2 years as an associate member director on the ARA board of directors, and got to see exactly what ARA does for its members. And like Kevin said, it's mind-boggling at the resources, but also how dedicated the staff is and the organization in general is in having its members interested at heart.
Right. And like Kevin said, like those resources, they are abundant and they are very, very useful.
Yep.
So go use them.
Yeah, absolutely. And even touching into ANSI standards and things like that people don't realize we do work behind the scenes to look out for our members and our associate members' best interests. But we sit on a lot of different ANSI standards from the equipment side, aerial equipment, forklifts, rough terrain forklifts, et cetera, and all the subcommittees under that, just to help take care of things. And I'll tell you that we've also joined it's called the Event Safety Working Group, which is a standard for the tent and event side of the industry as well. So, behind the scenes, we're doing things to make sure that regulations are shaped up in a way that is, realistic and also safe across the board. So we're working behind the scenes on things like that as well.
That's awesome.
The association has to work on those things, as well as members have to be directly involved in those things, because as we always say, if we're not there to help the industry let me back up. If we're not there to help the codes officials understand our industry, they're going to end up making rules that may not be at our best interest.
100%.
Would you agree with that, Kevin?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you have somebody creating rules that doesn't quite understand what's needed, right, or what's realistic, then you're going to have problems going out and meeting those things, and that's really going to hurt the industry. So that's one of the things that we do at ARA is we not only get on those boards and on those standards ourselves, but we're also constantly, petitioning our membership to say, hey, listen, you need to get involved, and this is how you do it, and we'll hold your hand to get you through the process and get you on those things so that we have an additional vote that will push those standards in the correct direction.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right. Well, that said, let's jump into today's topic, and specifically anchoring of tents.
Yep.
Tents are only good if they stay where you put them, right?
If you come back and get it and it's not in the same place you left it, not a good day.
So with that said, I want to point out too that there are organizations and manufacturers that are now giving anchoring the attention that it deserves. I first started in the industry in 2004. There was some talk about anchoring, but in that 21 years, it's really taken off in terms of how much people see how important that is, that your tents are, like you said, they are, when you go pick them up, they're where you left them.
Right.
Right. And in the condition that you left them.
And it's like, it's really important going back to this anchoring. I mean, if you've been to our tent school before, that kind of, the first time I ever went to our tent school was when I came to work for Top Tech. And when we did the stake pulling study, that was the first time I had ever really thought about, oh, wow, these actually have a holding capacity and it takes a certain amount of weight to hold this tent in place. It's not just, oh, yeah, it's fine halfway in, halfway out. And I'm sure we're going to get into that. But yeah.
a lot of installers have over the years have just kind of taken their book of work over their careers and figured out kind of what worked and what didn't. What we've tried to do as an industry in my time in the industry is to kind of try to find a way to quantify that. In other words, based on, different soil's going to be different, potentially even on the same job site, certainly from site to site, but within a job site, you could have different types of soils. So what we're trying to do is to educate the installer in how to make that a quantifiable number. In other words, how much will that, given a stake of a given size, diameter, et cetera. I'm going to let Kevin get into some of the science here in a little bit. But when you start talking about stakes of a given size, they will hold differently within a job site from point to point, possibly.
Yep.
And we've seen all the different pictures of, different size stakes, different diameters of stakes, different lengths of stakes, stakes driven in halfway, stakes driven at angles,
fluted, all kind of stuff.
So what Davis was just talking about was years ago, and we've been doing it in all of my time in the industry at Top Tech. When we do our tent school, we hire a tow truck. A lot of the people listening to the podcast are going to realize that, oh yeah, we've done that at different organization events and things. We've done the same thing, but we started doing that at Top Tech truly even before my time, where we bring in a tow truck and we have that tow truck basically mimic Mother Nature. Right? So we'll take different staking configurations from small single stakes, stakes driven in halfway, stakes driven at angles,
web, stake bars, all kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's right. All the way up to gang staking, et cetera. But what we do is we put that row of stakes a certain given distance away from a line, which represents the side pole line of the tent. Let's say it's 5 or 6 feet. Then we take the boom of the tow truck up 6 or 7 feet, or 7 or 8 feet, depending on,
for leg height,
to get the right angle of pull.
Yep.
And then we have a dynamometer that we own that we put in line. Then we pull on that and we can see the actual amounts of holding power of different stake configurations. We've done that as a way to try to quantify that so that if you're given an engineering document is going to tell you that they call it base plate reactions, or base reactions. At those base plates, they're experiencing X amount of load in different directions when there's wind applied to the tent or outside forces applied to the tent. So what it does is it lets you know that, okay, I've got this kind of stake driven in this, and average soil, it's going to hold about that. But still, that's good enough.
It's only as good as your soil is right there.
But it's also only as good as the person understands their soil to be. So Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about your work and what you've kind of figured out now about a way to further quantify that and make it something that relates back into being able to do some real math.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's funny because when I first came to ARA, the equipment side of things was real easy. And I had to start learning the tents and events side of things. And I remember I went to a tenting conference and started walking around and looking at things. And I started having questions about, the ballast block. You understand, if it weighs 3,000 pounds, that's 3,000 pounds of holding force, right? But with a stake, there's kind of a big question mark. So I started asking questions. How do you know how much force that's able to hold, or how much, ballast that creates by staking that putting that stake in that soil? And it was interesting because the answers I got were kind of similar to what you just said, Bryan. You said, well, in average soil, you probably have about maybe this much holding force, right?
Yep.
Oh, and by the way, if it's installed correctly and it's this and it's this,
everything
and
else is good,
then, you have about 1,000 pounds or whatever it is, right? And there were so many loophole statements in that one explanation that I walked away scratching my head going, nobody knows. Nobody knows. They go out and they put a stake in the ground and they just assume that it's going to hold, which is scary, right? I mean, now I will say, if you've been in this business and you've been doing this for a long time and you're the one pounding stakes in, you probably have a pretty good understanding, especially with the data that you guys have done with the tow truck tests and everything else and the dynamometer. You probably have a pretty good idea of what that stake is capable of holding. But when you have new people out there every year installing tent stakes, they may not have that background experience or knowledge. And now with equipment, we're not feeling the sledgehammer in our hands pounding in stakes. We're using equipment to pound in those stakes.
That's a great point.
So now we've lost touch with that feel, right?
Yep. Yep,
So
that's a great point.
it's a little scary, but what we did was we ended up going to Clemson, and we wanted to do a staking study. And let me tell you, the data that we got out of this, I drafted a study, and there was multiple aspects that I wanted to do some research on and get some additional data points and some information. And the data we got back was amazing. So a couple things that we wanted to study. We wanted to study the impact of tent stake age and the holding power related. Okay. So you think about a brand new tent stake, right? Shiny, brand new, right out of the box, right out of the package, versus one that's been in rental for 5 years, 7 years. You guys have seen those tent stakes, right? You know,
Yep.
you can picture it in your mind, right?
Mhm.
It's been painted, it's got, divots in it, it's got rust, it's maybe even a little bit tweaked or bent, right?
Yep.
So we wanted to see what that impact would be. We also wanted to do a moisture test and do some studies around that to better understand the data with moisture. And we did some moisture meter readings. We also wanted to do a pull test on a 45-degree pull with a guy versus a 60-degree pull with a guy. So, ideally, you're going to install your tent, you're going to come off the top of the tent there, and you're going to have that ratchet strap or that guy coming down to that tent stake at a 45-degree angle, right? That's your strongest. The stake is going to be straight into the ground, but the guy comes off at about a 45-degree angle. We all know that when we get out to these sites to install these tents, we may not be able to put that stake out that far.
Right.
We may want to push it in a little closer to the tent because we don't want it to be sticking out. We don't want it to be a trip hazard, all these little things, right? Space is limited. So we end up at a 60-degree angle. And I'll tell you, the data we got back on that, it's going to blow your mind when you look at the study. It really is. What a difference 15 degrees of pull angle makes on a tent stake. And then we also did some testing with the tool that I had designed and built. It's called the ARA GT tool. And we wanted to validate the scale on that, which I know we'll get into here a little later. But, some of these things was amazing. I'll pause for you guys, and I don't know how deep you want me to go into some of the information. I'm more than happy to share some of this.
I like it all.
I would. One question I have is, when you brought this to Clemson, did they act like they were really learning anything through the process? Things that they were seeing things that they didn't expect to see as they kind of went down this road of quantifying this data?
Yeah, it was interesting because the students that I worked with, it was definitely a challenging project for them. And we literally hit the road for like 3 weeks, 3-week stints. And I'd rent a vehicle. I'd go pick up these Clemson students, pull in a trailer, and we travel for 3 weeks, and we would collect data. And as we're performing these tests and we start to see these correlations in the data, and we start to see some linear lines and things lining up on the data charts, it was amazing. And like I said, some of the data we got back just blew our minds. And even these mechanical engineering students, they were really interested in the project and really interested in the numbers that we were getting out of it. So it was nice to see how enthusiastic or excited they were about the project as well.
Well, going back to what you'd said earlier, kind of about the way that tent people talk about how they had been staking, basically you got a big sandwich or sentence full of variables, right? It's just, they can say what they say, but at the end of the day, they presented you with tons of variables, mights and maybes and kindas and that kind of thing. And it's a ton of different variables that are at play. And again, the whole point of all this is trying to quantify that to take some of the guesswork, obviously, out of the way.
No more assumptions.
Yep. So tons and tons of room for improvement. I think this is really headed in the right direction. Kevin and I had a brief conversation earlier and talked about the fact that this all looks so much different now than it did 10, 20 years ago, right? And if we're doing it correctly, it's going to look different as we improve and as we get better through this. It's going to look different 10 to 20 years down the road than it does today, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, Bryan. I looked at some data that was out, and it was from 2016, right? And that's what we had at the time, and that's what we utilized, and that was what made the industry safer at that point in time. There was a study conducted in which, the data came out and said if you take a 16-pound sledge and you hit a tent stake with an average swing and it does this, or it penetrates into the earth this much, then that will equate to this much holding power, right? If you take your thumbnail and you dig it into the surface of the ground, this is going to equate to this much holding power of a tent stake, right? Now, again, that sounds a little crazy. And those were some of the things that I got, as I was asking questions a few years back and seeing that there was kind of this hole here. But, at the time, that was the information we had. That was the testing that we had conducted for our industry. And that's what made it safer, right? Because prior to that, we didn't have anything.
Right.
But now this, just to your point, this is the next step, right? We've taken, this and we've tweaked it and improved it, and we've built in some consistencies, and we've built in some science and some physics, which is near and dear to my heart. And we've made the testing repeatable, right? If it's going to be scientific, if it's going to be real good data, it's got to be repeatable. And that was part of my focus with this. Because honestly, when you take a 16-pound sledge and you hit with an average swing, and who's hitting it? Me, my wife, my daughter? Is it a direct blow? Is it a glancing blow? How far did we pound the tent stake in before we conducted the test? I mean, there's too many variables.
Yeah.
And the thumbnail thing, you're only testing the first quarter inch of soil with that.
Right.
That's not where the holding power is, right?
Yeah. Average by whose standards? Yeah. I mean, could be anything, right? So we've always said too, as far as having the industry's best ideas at heart, what we talked about is exposure is really good when it's good, but if it's even a little bit bad, it's really bad. And we talk about all that from a safety standpoint. Even back when we talk about safety culture, and I know Kevin's got a huge background with safety, but it's when something goes bad, or if it comes to an official's attention, then it's really bad on everybody, and that way we're in it together. So everybody would be well served to listen to this and kind of internalize and bring this staking making staking quantifiable into their organization that helps the whole industry.
Yeah, bring it to practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it takes all of us, right? All of us working together. And in that, I'll even say, IFAI, ATA, Matra, and ARA, we've worked together to push the ball forward for the industry. We've worked on projects together to make tenting safer, installations and just tented events safer. And it's been a great relationship between the three different associations to work on things like this and continue to push that ball forward. And, it's not only an honor, but a privilege to work with those other associations to be able to do that.
Great. That's awesome. Yep. Let's talk about the fact that a lot of and we've touched on this a little bit, but the fact that a lot of installers are making guesses in terms of how much holding power their given stakes are. So when we go back to the tow truck example, we start out with a 3/4 inch stake, and literally you can pull it out of the ground by hand in most cases. For a long time, tent companies were sending those out with their over-the-counter party canopies and such. Mr. Customer, good luck. Go put this up. Good luck holding that down. Not with no real care or concern for what liability was at stake.
Right.
No pun intended. And then as we move up from there, the answer then was always, well, if the ground is soft, then you either add stakes. We started introducing stakes of larger diameter. So you add stakes of larger diameter or longer length or more of them. And that's really the only way that we knew to attack a situation where you get into a place that's got like loamy, sandy soil that doesn't hold a stake like the clay that we have around here. You can put basically what we've seen over the course of time in our studies is a 1 inch by 40 inch double head stake, which is the most common stake in the industry, driven vertically or straight up and down at full length into the soil, is going to hold about 1,000 pounds again in average soil. But what's average?
What's average?
Right. So again, we try to make that as quantifiable as we can, and we still end up with questions. Right.
Yeah, you're right. And where you're at, I'll call it the Clemson clay that you guys have. Holy moly.
It matches our colors.
Holding power. What's
it
that?
matches our team colors, orange. It's
You're right.
It's red clay.
It is great holding power.
Yeah.
It is. It's amazing holding power if it's dry.
Right.
But, you start to get that wet, all things change.
Just out of curiosity, what did y'all find about our clay when it got wet as opposed to when it was dry?
Well, I'd have to go back and pull specific data for that location testing, because we tested all over a bunch of different states in the Southeast to make sure that we hit all the different soil types, and we'd have data for all these different soil types. But I will tell you, we got exactly what you would assume. As soon as you start to saturate the soil, you're going to lose holding power, and that's going to continue to decline And the interesting data that we got back from the moisture test was at some point that actually plateaus off and you don't lose any more holding power. And that is achieved when you have 100% saturation, which makes sense when you think about it later.
Right.
You can only get so wet.
Right.
Yeah, it can only get so wet, right? The soil can only hold 100% moisture. Once you're never going to get to 101%.
Right.
So at some point, that data, that holding power graph continued to drop as the moisture content went up. And once we hit that 100% saturation, those levels just plateaued off, which was cool data to see.
Right. It's interesting.
So I want to talk about something before we get into the specifics of the testing tool, et cetera, which I want you to talk about later and kind of introduce to our audience if they don't know about it and talk specifics there. But let's talk, I want to step back for a second, kind of talk at a broader scope. When it comes to anchoring in general, let's talk about efficiencies. What's the most efficient way to anchor a tent? It's driving stakes. You got to get good at driving stakes, is what we say. I know the rage in the industry right now is that people don't want you to penetrate their soil, but a lot of times there are conversations that need to be had with a site or an end user to let them know this is the best way to hold this tent down. Yeah, there are other ways to do it with a ballast. Again, topic for another episode. But when it comes to staking is efficient because it takes up a very small footprint, all things considered, in terms of what it's capable of doing. It's fast. It's efficient, and it's efficient in a lot of ways. It's efficient in terms of how, certainly with the tools that we have available to us in today's industry, right? With all, like Kevin said a minute ago, the mechanical drivers.
Right.
Did y'all have a mechanical driver when you were in the field?
It was me.
You were the mechanical driver.
I was the mechanical driver. So I am he.
Yeah, that's right. But so many tent companies now have some sort of a mechanical device to help drive those stakes in to kind of take away that human element. So that makes it even more efficient. You could drive a stake faster than ever before. It takes up, again, like I said, a very small footprint.
Taking up a small footprint too, transport.
That's what I was about to get to, right? So just putting them on a truck.
Yeah, I mean,
a stake that will hold 1,000 pounds, air quotes, a stake that will hold 1,000 pounds versus a block
that's 500 pounds,
barrel, etc. That won't hold, but about half of what a stake will is going to take up multiples of the amount of
100 times
real estate
more
on a truck, or a payload, right?
You're
a
talking
10-pound a stake weighs 10 pounds.
Yep, you're talking about a whole nother vehicle you got to drag to the job site.
Correct. So versus what stake. So we are, and in my opinion, will always be a huge proponent of stakes first because I think it's the most efficient. It makes the most sense for a lot of people. But Kevin, I don't know if you've seen it in your time in the industry, but certainly we've seen more and more requests for other ways of staking because people don't want somebody to penetrate their soil. Do you think that's from education or is that something else at play?
As we start to build tents in more, urban areas, then you start to run into issues of underground utilities or irrigation systems or drainage lines or gas lines. You never know. And is there, additional things that you got to check for before you start staking? Absolutely, right? It's that 811 call before you dig or penetrate the soil, that kind of thing. Yeah. And you need to make sure that you have good communication with your contact at that site and you know what's below the ground before you start, slamming stakes in. And I know we've all heard stories and seen pictures and videos of somebody putting a tent stake in the ground and all of a sudden the ground starts bubbling or other things, right? So, to your point though, Bryan, like it is the most efficient way. You get ultimate holding power with these stakes as long as you understand the soil and you've got some good solid results and you've got good installers that have experience. It's definitely the way to go. I mean, you guys hit all the good points as far as ballast. It's great and you know exactly how much it weighs and that's how much force you've got holding that tent down. But you're right, you got to have multiple semi trucks coming in. You got to have heavy equipment to offload those blocks and move them around. You use stakes, you can get to a remote site, put up a tent, very limited equipment to get those stakes driven in or pulled out. And it's efficient.
Yeah, I mean, how you hold that tent down depends on how you price the job too. I mean, it goes all the way into that.
Yeah. And again, we'll get to talking about it when we address the ballast, but that's certainly also it's an opportunity for revenue. It's a revenue center for a lot of our customers who have understood and
Figured out the way
come
to
to figure
do
it
it.
out that they can make money
Off
doing
that,
those
yeah.
kind of things. I've also had people tell us that, ballast is essentially it's the same wherever you go versus the unknowns for when you're dealing with a stake. But to Kevin's point, and that's what I want him to roll into next, is how we quantify that and now take that guesswork totally out of the game. So now that we've talked about staking as a primary method and an efficient way to do it, we have talked about our tow truck and showing some quantifiable data, what different staking configurations hold. I would say the bigger thing that you can learn from when we show it that way is not what they will hold, but the relationships between them and what kind of holding power you can gain by going to different stake configurations, right? 3-hole, 5-hole stake bars, it's not necessarily a linear relationship, but you're going to hold multiples of what a stake driven into the ground. And while I'm at it, I just happen to think, let's talk about stakes driven into the ground. We have proven that stakes. I'm going to put this. I get asked this all the time when I go into a customer's location. They will pull their guys out of the warehouse, stand them in front of me, and Davis, I'm sure you've done it too. They will make us say in front of their guys, because our guys don't want to listen to them, what's the better way to stake something, and straight into the ground or at an angle. And I have to solve that
every time I go in somewhere.
Right.
It's like, we always do them at an angle because it has to hold. And no, that's not how this works.
So we put that to bed. So I'll put it to bed now. Stakes driven, without getting into the science. And I know this is an audio podcast, so I can't exactly draw it out for you, but stakes driven into the ground will hold more than a stake driven at an angle.
If you ever have any questions, ask for the paper trick and I'll show you why that is the case.
Yep.
It's all about the soil wedge.
That's right. That's
right.
all about soil wedge.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
as we developed our manual, I made sure that was like page 1 of our manual to talk about proper stake installation, because a lot of people have that assumption that if we pound it in at an angle, it's going to hold better. And enough of us have been down that road. We see the results. The data's in.
Yeah, and
Kevin,
we
Kevin,
take
go
that
ahead,
for
Davis.
granted. We take that for granted that it's just a common knowledge that this is how you should do it. But like you said, every time you go into a warehouse, you find another person that's still driving them in at an angle.
And Kevin, with your study too, when you're so driven by data to make it quantifiable again, you have to. That's one of the things that I'm sure you say that this is all based on stakes driven directly and straight perpendicular with the lay of the ground, right?
You're correct. And here's the other piece of the puzzle that I think we need to start getting into the habit of telling people. And it's the coming off of the top of the tent stake that's fully driven into the ground, straight into the ground at a 45-degree angle with our ratchet strap or guy up to the tent. Because that 45-degree angle is so important. That is the strongest angle that you're going to come off of that stake up to the tent. And I think that needs to be additional information that we continue to regurgitate over and over again, along with that stake being driven straight into the ground. Because I'll tell you a little sneak preview of our tent stake guidance document that's free to download on the ARA website. It shows you the information that we got when we did that 60-degree pull test versus the 45-degree pull test. And we saw values, the holding force of that tent stake drop anywhere from 24% to 52% to 81% loss of holding power of that tent stake changing that 15
from
degrees.
15 degrees.
Wow.
15 degrees. And we saw, we threw out the big outliers, the real low ones or the real high ones. And we focused on the data that was in front of us. But yeah, 81% loss of holding power. So think about that for just a second. If you assumed 1,000 pounds of holding force on that tent stake, right?
Yep.
And now you have moved that in just a little closer to the tent, so it's not sticking out. It's not a hazard, a trip hazard, or whatever, or you just don't have the space. So you move that stake a little closer into the tent.
Yep.
And you draw that tension. You thought you had 1,000 pounds. You've got less than 200 pounds.
That's crazy.
Wow, that's eye-opening. And I'll say, in the interest of full disclosure, we have always, as in my knowledge, just about every other manufacturer that I've talked to, have always told people half, which is 45, to 2/3, which is going to be closer to Kevin's angled number. What'd you say, 19%? Or
60
degrees.
angle, 60 degrees.
Sorry, 60 degrees. Sorry. So we've always told people half to 2/3, especially on a pole tent, because and again, it's anecdotal, never so much proven to my knowledge, unless there's been some sort of structural engineer that's figured that out as far as what it does to the stability of the tent. stability tent's only good if the stake's still there at
Right.
the end of the day. So we've always said
Yeah.
half to 2/3. So on the stake line, that's why we say 6 foot on an 8-foot side pole,
Yeah.
6 foot away on say and 5 on a 7, up to 1-to-1, which was 7 feet out, 7 feet up, 8 to 8, etc. So
Yeah. Soil characteristics play into those numbers, but yeah, when we saw that 81% reduction in holding power, it blew our minds.
crazy eye opening.
Crazy data.
Yeah. All right. So, Kevin, tell us a little bit about this tool that's the rage right now. And I think you guys have sold some of those. And so Kevin's going to tell us about ARA staking tool, how it came to be, what it is, and how you can get it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the ARA GT tool. It's the ground testing tool. That's what I'm going to let everybody know. You may hear some other stories there as to what GT stands for, but if you read the full Clemson study, you'll see it. Long story short, I came to this side of the industry when I came to ARA, and I started, dabbling in the tents and events thing. And like I talked about before, I had questions, how is this calculated? And then I got all these loophole statements, and it was a concern. Well, on the equipment side, when I was with the rental equipment company, we had a lot of accidents that I investigated. And on one of them, I was investigating an aerial piece of equipment that had tipped over. And I ended up getting pulled in through depositions and getting questioned by legal counsel from, across the aisle. And the discussion point was about how soft the soil was. And I had reported that the soil was soft and not compacted. And that led to part of the reason that this machine tipped over. And I got grilled by the legal counsel as to how I knew the soil was soft and, what certifications or qualifications or scientific testing tools did I utilize to understand the soil was soft. And, long story short, I basically told them, look at the photos. You can see my footprints and how far I sunk in. And I'm about a, 200-pound person. The soil was soft, But after that deposition, I went back to my office and I thought, how can I do this for future situations if that's the questions that are going to be thrown to me in a courtroom? And I started doing some research, and I found out there's this tool called a pentrometer or a penetrometer, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But it's a scientific tool for testing soil compaction and soil density. And when I came to ARA and I started asking questions about stakes and holding power, I started thinking, okay, there's got to be a way to make this easy for people, installers, to better understand the soil characteristics on their specific site. And I kind of went back to that, pentrometer. And basically the tool that I designed and drew up and developed is a very crude pentrometer, but it's been validated by the study that we've conducted with Clemson University. The basics of this tool, it's all based on physics. There's no computer boards, there's no batteries, there's no, nothing like that you got to worry about. It's all made out of 304 stainless steel. You use it in a way that you put the tool into the ground, and it goes in about 12 inches into the ground. So we're not testing the first few inches of soil. We're testing below 10 inches, which is where you really get your holding power on a tent stake, is that 10 inches and below. So that's the soil that we're testing. And it's down to physics, where you drop a 16-pound weight 4 times. And on the scale, there's an A, B, and a C zone. And those A, B, C zones correlate to different holding powers of that soil. And this was all validated and tested by Clemson University. And that's where we got our chart for the information.
So that's 16 pounds dropped from a given height, not an average blow with a 16-pound hammer.
You got it. It's repeatable. It's the same energy delivered every single time. You bring the slide weight up to a stop of the T handle and you let it go 4 times. And at that point, you read your scale. Are you in the A zone, the B zone, or the C zone? And that's going to tell you on your chart how much holding power you have in that soil. And then part of your procedure is to take that weight and drop it 2 more times to ensure that you didn't hit some sort of an anomaly or a rock or something underground that you didn't realize and got a bad result. So you're going to drop it 2 more times to ensure that the tool continues to penetrate into the soil and that your test was valid. And at that point, you record all your data on a form that we provide with the tool and the manual. And once all your data is recorded, you can have that to go back to any kind of codes enforcement official or fire marshal and say, listen, I've tested this site. I know my tent stakes are going to have this much holding power, and I'm going to install this many tent stakes, and we're good.
That's incredible. So what was the timeline on the study, Kevin, kind of start to finish?
So I began working on this probably late in 2020. I had this idea. I drew up some drawings. I went to my supervisor and said, hey, there's an issue in the industry, and I think I can solve it. And I can solve it in a way that it's easy to use, very user-friendly. It's a robust tool that can be designed and built and, tent installers will be able to perform this test without question, repeatable results, and really know what they're getting into on a specific site. At that point, I was given the green light to go ahead and move forward. I ordered in stainless raw material, bar stock, and other things, and went to my buddy's machine shop, and I made the very first 2 prototypes of this tool. And at that point, we decided we're going to move forward. I hired Clemson University to validate the scale on my tool. And we conducted that study, weeks and weeks and weeks of driving around the Southeast to hit a bunch of different soil types. I learned more about soil than I ever want to know. It has been quite an adventure for sure. And just recently, we released the tool for sale on the ARA shop website, and it's up there available. Of course, ARA members get a huge discount off this tool. And yeah, it's been a heck of a ride.
So that's through the ARA website, and then you don't have a specific website that you can rattle off, do you?
Well, I
Not
just
to put you on the spot.
I just pulled it up, and you basically just go to the ARA website, go to the shop, scroll down, I don't know, few scrolls, and it's right there in your face.
Yeah, you got to ararental.org/shop, and you scroll down, and you'll be able to click on that tool and make the purchase right there, and it'll ship directly to your store. If you're buying more than 3 of them, because a lot of folks that I've talked to want them not just for their installers to verify the results that their salesperson went out and conducted maybe months previously, but they want their salesperson to have it so that they know how to quote the job, right?
Awesome.
Are we going to stake this, or are we going to ballast it? And with a few simple tests, they can get that information, log it. When the installers go out to put the tent up, they can validate and ensure that that data is still accurate, and then they can put the tent up.
Certainly one of the underlying things that we haven't talked about is a liability issue with tent companies too, and to be able to provide the quantifiable data for how they decided to stake a job. Kevin, have you had interactions with, ownership, management, et cetera, different companies and any kind of feedback on what that looks like to them from a liability standpoint?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've had quite a few conversations here recently with some ownership of different tent rental companies, and they're starting to see more and more codes enforcement folks kind of cracking down on temporary structures and requesting more information or data to ensure that those things are properly anchored in one way or another. And this, like you said, this is quantifiable data. We can use the form to log all of that and record it. And now we've got liability protection that we did the right thing, right? As installers, we went out, we did the right thing, we checked the site. Even if something would happen later, you've taken steps to be a safer tent install crew or a safer tent company.
Awesome.
It's just, and I've told people this too, right? The tool is great. I mean, it's gorgeous, 304 stainless, real shiny. It's got nice curves on it and stuff. It is a beautiful tool. But that's only a small part of it. The very important part that people are going to miss is documentation. You have to record your results. You have to save that data. You have to log that data. If you don't do that, there's no sense in even using the tool.
So those of you who have heard our podcast early on, and we talked about a site survey.
Yep.
Perfect opportunity to record this data when you do a proper site survey.
And I would go as far as every time you go, even if you are going back to the same site, I'd still test it again right before installing, right? Because it can change over time,
Yeah. Yeah, our study shows moisture content changes. You don't know if they've come in and dumped loads of sand in there in the past year or so and changed the soil structure or anything else, or if they've done work where they've dug the soil up and disturbed it and then put it back and planted grass seed and, it's a few months later. There's a lot of things that can change on a site. You're not there every day, right?
Kevin, not to put you on the spot, but something that just kind of went through my head. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Did you guys happen to test any? I know people are always asking about asphalt and parking lots. Did you guys do anything with penetrating a parking lot and then testing the soil under that in different conditions and seeing what that looks like? Or are we talking about grass-covered soil, bare soil, gravel, et cetera? Can you kind of go into that a little bit?
So we did test all the ones that you just mentioned, except for asphalt. And here's the reasoning behind that. We felt that we were going to have trouble having people let us drill holes in their asphalt.
Fair enough.
But we're testing 10 inches down. That's where the test result actually happens, in which case we're below that asphalt layer. And the soil typically under that asphalt is going to be pretty dry. So we have data in all kinds of different soil types and soil types that were dry when we did the testing. So the asphalt thickness is probably only a couple inches thick of asphalt.
Yep.
And the test that we conduct was, 10 inches below.
So you guys got into possibly looking at some areas were compacted, maybe through mechanical compaction versus just stormy runoff areas that may have gone down to, say, the clay layer. Didn't know how exactly in depth you got into some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we did. We actually were fortunate enough to have some construction happening at Clemson University, and we actually had a few state parks. So when we traveled around, we hit a lot of state parks and private businesses that allowed us to do testing in their areas. And we did testing even on sites where, a rental company has a common tent site that they have a good customer. They let us come in and do testing there. So we got quite a different variety of testing soils and sites and compaction levels and disturbed versus undisturbed. And I'll even tell you, one of the sites down in Charlotte was crazy interesting because on one side of the site, we were getting numbers in the neighborhood of, 12, 13, 1,500 pounds of holding force on that tent stake. And we moved over probably, I don't know, maybe 30 yards and did another test.
Wow.
And we lost holding power to the extent that we were below 500 pounds of holding force of the soil that we were 30 yards difference. And when we dug down, we found out that there had been fill put in that was a real sandy fill, and the soil changed because, when you get into cities and those kinds of areas, there's a lot of fill that comes in to make the landscape the way they want it.
Yep.
And you'll hit rocks, you'll hit, bricks and all kinds of backfill that they've put in. But in some situations, you may have completely different soil structure, just, 10 yards, 30 yards away.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's wild.
Perfect reason to have the tool and being able to test.
Yeah, I was about to say, that having this tool after just hearing about it for a little bit of time, I've heard about it. It's a no-brainer.
I mean, 30 yards, think about it. That's the difference in one end of the tent to the other.
It's literally a no-brainer to have this in your arsenal, especially going to do job sites and pricing the job. Like
Absolutely.
This tool right here is an absolute no-brainer. And I'm looking at, if you're an ARA member, it is a good discount. Like you said, it's solid.
Yeah, we are really passing this along because we just want to make the industry safer when it comes to this thing. Oh. And it's interesting. Like I've had people question me and say that they're not excited about this tool coming out because they're afraid that codes enforcement folks are going to hear about this and they're going to require this, right?
Well, that's not a bad thing to require it. If it's making everybody better and safer, you stole my thunder, Kevin, because one of the points I was just about to make is some of the people hearing this are going to be a little bit intimidated about it, but going, well, now I've got to kind of up my game. Good. Right?
Yeah.
So what I would challenge you with is to say, don't be scared of it. Be the trendsetter, be the leader in the market, be the person who brings about that change that we're all talking about. It's not something to be scared about because I'm telling you, when things fail, the news crew isn't showing up to tell you did a good job.
They never show up to give you a pat on the back.
No, they're showing up to
bring bad light to our industry.
Absolutely, and to show, hey, this is an unsafe practice,
yep.
And we have to do it. Everybody listening to this is in it together because these are event rental companies, people who are staking for a living. If that stuff fails, it affects us sitting here as the same as it does everybody else that's listening to this.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. And here's the thing, the price. I mean, you guys see the price on the website, and I'll go ahead and drop it right now for an ARA member, $699, right?
Yeah.
That is nothing compared to losing your tent, destroying your tent, somebody getting hurt. And this tool is made in a very robust fashion. It's going to last for a very long time.
Right.
You're going to be challenged to destroy it. And I hate to throw that out to you. Somebody's going to do it, right? But what I'm saying is, for the price of this tool, to ensure that you've got documentation and you guys are installing correctly, it's a no-brainer. It really is. We continue to see, and I'll speak from a government affairs perspective right now, and some of the conversations I've had with the event rental folks, we're starting to see a lot of states get their magnifying glasses out and really start looking at temporary structures. We are seeing states that are requiring more and more things, and the folks that are putting these regulations in effect don't know the industry. This tool is designed not just to make the industry safer and protect our members and anybody that's out there putting up a tent or the general public passing by that tent, but it's also there to kind of help shape this in a way that is achievable for our members to go out and meet these regulations. If we don't set these regulations, if we don't get out in front of this and make the industry safer, somebody else is going to be jamming regulations down our throat that are unrealistic.
Yep.
Can't say it any better.
Yeah, I was about spot on there.
Kevin, anything else? We're going to kind of wrap it up, I guess, here. Now, I appreciate you being on with us, sharing all that knowledge. It's impressive for your time in the industry to have such a grasp on it and have dove into it like you have with the study and everything else you've contributed. For those that were able to be at Matra and Greenville years ago, Kevin actually set things on fire, so he's multi-talented that way too, right?
Yeah, it was an interesting one. Shortly after I finished that session, I heard fire trucks coming, so we cleaned up real quick. Thank goodness they weren't coming for us. But when you shoot 30-foot flames into the air, I mean, you're getting some attention, right?
That's right.
That's great. Davis, anything else before we wrap it up?
Just shout out to the real University of Clemson of doing this study. Wasn't Georgia, it was Clemson. Just FYI.
I'm not saying a word. But no, Kevin, thanks so much. We just kind of want to wrap it up again, talking about staking is the absolute most efficient way to anchor a tent still. That may never change. Kevin, again, I couldn't thank you enough for being with us. I appreciate it. Anything you got for the audience or listeners before we leave?
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you guys for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Love doing these things, love talking in front of groups and educating. I love to entertain and educate at the same time. And the biggest thing I'll end with here is something that I've ended a lot of the safety, Take 5 for Safeties and the little safety cartoons that we've done at ARA is get out there and make safety a priority. It's up to you to make this industry safer, and that's how you do it. You make safety a priority. Thank you.
Well said.
Thanks, Kevin. And like I said, I'm going to be pushing this on everybody I come in contact with now.
Absolutely.
You need to have one of these.
With that, we're signing off. See you again in a couple weeks.
Later, taters.